Hey guys, Jeff and welcome to today's video. So today I want to talk about Canadian e-bike laws and why I think they're stupid in most cases. And I guess I want to offer up some solutions as to what we can do to change that. Now, huge disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I don't offer any kind of legal advice. I'm not going to be deep diving every province's and every state's individual requirements and regulation in place. And I don't want to do like this big impact analysis of every little change that could possibly be done. I just want to talk about the very broad federal regulations, specifically in Canada, but I'm also going to be touching on the US a little bit because they're our neighbors, and of course we are in the same boat as they are, and just talk about the situation as it is right now and what I think we could do to improve the situation, why I think it needs to be changed. Of course, it's only going to be my opinion, so if you guys disagree or want to offer up a different opinion or a different perspective, or maybe comment on something that you think we should be doing different as well that I haven't really touched in this video, make sure to leave those thoughts in the comment section below. And without further ado, let's start with the actual video. Now, all provinces allow e-bikes with a maximum of 500 watts peak output and 32 kilometers an hour top speed. And that's sort of my first problem with the regulation that we have in Canada, is why do we have a peak power limitation of 500 watts and also a top speed? To me, this makes no sense. If you're already enforcing a top speed that the bike can reach, to me, it really makes no sense if you're limiting the power. Having more power isn't going to make the bike more dangerous. I would even argue that it would make the bike more dangerous to have less power with such limited top speeds, because you're essentially a heavy bicycle. 32 kilometers an hour isn't all that fast. It's 20 miles an hour. Any person can reasonably pedal a normal bike up to 32 kilometers an hour. Having a heavier bike with less power just makes you more vulnerable in traffic, in my opinion. It really doesn't make sense. Also, it makes the bikes harder to pedal uphill. I find that in many cases 500 watts isn't quite sufficient to get the bikes up the hill. Another reason why I think the 500 watt limitation makes no sense is if you consider in the US they have a 750 watt limitation, which isn't much better, but it's still a little better. And having a different kind of regulation than they do actually introduces a whole other nightmare, because in the US the bikes are made to support 750 watts, so the engines are bigger, the controllers are bigger, the batteries are bigger to accommodate more power. When they try to bring the bikes over to Canada, essentially they're not going to change all those components out. They will just program them differently, so you're carrying all that bulk that you don't really need for 500 watts, because our bikes need to have 250 watts less, but we still have the same components. Another reason why I think this is very stupid is because this regulation doesn't really take into account what kind of bike you have. So 500 watt mid-drive and 500 watt hub wheel are very different 500 watts. When you have a 500 watt mid-drive, essentially the power is going to the crank and is then being multiplied by the derailleur with the chain, whereas if you have a hub drive, the power is going directly to the wheel. So it's a very different kind of power delivery, but they're still both being limited to 500 watts. Now, the driver's license situation also makes no sense to me. So many provinces don't really have a license requirement. Most of them will have an age restriction, so either 12 years old in some provinces, up to 14 years old in others. But for some reason, some provinces actually require riders 14 to 18 to have a moped license, which I don't really understand why you would need something like this. So this is the case for Quebec, where I live. Since e-bikes here aren't considered as motor vehicles, they don't require insurance, they don't require registration. So why the license? I would understand if you had a vehicle that needed to be registered, you would need to have a license to operate it. That kind of makes sense. And for all the insurance stuff, that would also be a requirement. Typical pedal bicycles don't require a license. Why would you need a license for an e-bike that is just essentially considered a more powerful bicycle? It's not even like the courses that you're going to take to do your moped license are really going to help you out with riding your e-bike. They're very different animals. They don't operate the same at all. Whatever you learn about your moped doesn't really translate to the e-bike, so I don't understand why they make you do this. But hey, that's another dumb regulation that's in place that I think we should change. Another thing that I think is very weird in Canada is that we don't really have regulation in place that defines the type of bikes that we have. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, we have many types of e-bikes out there. You have many power levels, you have bikes with throttles, bikes with no throttles, bike with rear hub motors, bike with mid-drive motors, and all that stuff is sort of being pulled together into the e-bike mess and being handled the same way, when in fact a lot of these things are very different. And that's again something that I don't really understand. In the US, I think the class system makes a little more sense, where you have some power limitations based on the class you're in and whether or not you have a throttle. There's a couple classes in most states. I think that makes a little more sense, but I think even that could probably be improved. So I've been complaining and rambling now for about 5 minutes about things that I don't like about Canadian regulation and even some of the US regulation. So now let me just offer up a couple solutions of what I think we should implement. I think the root of the problem with the e-bike regulation right now is that there is no clear definition of what an e-bike is. And having this very ambiguous definition of what an e-bike is makes it very difficult to have concrete and coherent regulation about the thing. So what I think we need to do is really define what an e-bike is and the various classes that it belongs to. So define the type of motors that you put in, where you put them, if they can be throttle actuated or not, and based on that you could create a chart of all the types of e-bike and decide what needs what kind of requirement and what kind of regulation basically. Once we'd have a proper definition of what an e-bike is and what the various types of e-bikes are, then we could decide whether or not they should be considered motor vehicles or bicycles, because right now they're sort of riding this gray area right in the middle and they're neither a motorcycle nor a bicycle, and they're kind of both at the same time. So based on this classification and clear understanding of what they are, we could decide whether or not we need licenses for them, whether we need insurance, registration. If they're a motor vehicle, then sure, they require registration, insurance, a license, and all that fun stuff. And if they're not, if they're really just a bicycle, or if certain types of e-bikes are more bicycle-like than others, then those could be considered bicycles. They wouldn't require a license, they wouldn't require registration, they wouldn't require insurance. That way we could remove all these useless regulations that are sort of in the middle, that cover anything and nothing at the same time. And the reason why I think this is important is because right now there is a lot of confusion as to what they are. And the e-bike movement is really gaining some traction right now. So a lot of people are getting into e-bikes and the confusion is only growing bigger. There are more and more people are confused as to what they are. Even police is unsure as to what to do whenever an e-bike goes by. All that will lead to is eventually abuse on either side, where people are abusing their rights as e-bike riders and police are sort of abusing the situation because they don't know how to handle it. So they'll always interpret the law in the most extreme way possible. And I think this is really creating a very bad environment for the e-bike riders. And I think what will end up happening if we let that go on for too long is that situations are going to happen where people are going to get hurt, or a situation is going to occur when an e-bike rider is in the wrong, and it creates a whole lot of legal consequences, and it's going to entail all sorts of harsh and very unnecessary regulations, when if we had had the proper regulation in the first place, then we wouldn't have this situation, and the police officers and the courts and everyone would know how to handle it. So anyways, guys, that's been sort of my thoughts on this situation. I'm curious to know what you think. Do we need to have more regulation, less regulation? Do we leave it like that? Do you think the regulation in place makes sense, or do you, like me, agree that it doesn't really make much sense and that it needs to be reworked before too many people are on the road with e-bikes with very confusing and ambiguous regulations? So anyways, guys, that's been it for me. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I will be back on Sunday with a new music video, and until next time, peace, take it easy.